Dear ambassadors, distinguished members of the European Parliament, honoured guests of the European Commission, A4E colleagues and friends, welcome to the A4E Aviation Summit 2020. I'm Max Kingsley-Jones from FlightGlobal, and we're delighted at FlightGlobal to be partnering with Airlines for Europe for their 4th Aviation Summit. And welcome to the Metropole for the first time, where we have a packed agenda for you today. As ever, this plan has been evolving since the programme was produced. Indeed, since the handout was printed, but the latter is probably the most accurate information, although things have changed a little bit since that was printed. Over the course of the day, we will hear from many of the A4E members, as well as from leaders across the aviation industry, along with policymakers and other professionals on the key issues facing the sector. And we'll conclude today's event with what I'm sure will be a lively CEO debate hosted by Bloomberg's Guy Johnson. By the way, when we break for lunch and we have afternoon coffee, that will be served upstairs in the lounge area behind the registration desk, where I think some of you have been already today. Before we get proceedings underway, I'd like to tell a little bit about FlightGlobal and mention a few housekeeping points. As I'm sure you're all aware, FlightGlobal offers an extensive aviation portfolio across multiple channels. That's print, online, jobs, and of course events like this one here. By the way, don't forget to pick up your copies of Flight International and our signature industry monthly magazine, Airline Business, which are available. If not, you may be sitting on them. Flight got started in the aviation business not long after the Wright brothers did, in 1909, to be precise. So we celebrated our 110th anniversary last year. To put that into perspective, we were into our second decade when the likes of KLM and BA's predecessors began flying passengers around Europe in 1919. I think that says it all about Flight's legacy. That's a cover from every one of our 112 years. And we've had some pretty good ones over the years. That's the end of our commercial break. I'd like to now thank all our A4E Summit sponsors, because their contribution obviously makes this event the success it always is. So it's always important to remember who makes it happen every year. So thank you, Rolls-Royce, Amadeus, Boeing, Neste, Airbus, Deutsche Telekom, Embraer, Inmarsat, Panasonic, BOC Aviation, PPG, FTI Consulting, and Shell. And of course, thanks to our partners at A4E for all the hard work that you've put into organising today's event and the agenda. So we're using Slido, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a great way of interacting with the panelists and the speakers. So hopefully you've all connected to the Wi-Fi. Have you all done that? Hopefully you have. And if you have done so, I'm going to give you a quick test in a moment. So if you can connect now, this will allow you to interact with all the sessions during the day. So you go to slido.com. Oh, I just hit the wrong button, sorry. Maybe it changed automatically. And the hashtag is A4E Summit. The information's on your passes that you're wearing. So don't forget to use this during the sessions, but I was going to give you a quick check ride. I think that's great that the team have done that for me. I do not have control, it's on autopilot. So the poll question I thought we'd try out with is just to get everything going. I know we talked a little bit about coronavirus already, but there's other things that are playing out, and I think coronavirus, whilst it's a massive distraction in the short term, and obviously is going to probably cause some deep wounds this year, I think there's bigger issues facing the industry hopefully bigger issues than that going forward. But let's hear what the audience thinks. There's the global economy, which of course is partly linked to coronavirus, environmental issues, and fleet issues. There's quite a few of them out there at the moment, not just the MAX. Oh, it's the coronavirus. But Michael said we're all going to get bored of that in a few weeks, so that's good news in the press conference earlier. And finally, a safety brief. There's no drill plan today, so if you hear an alarm, then presumably it's a real one, unfortunately. So please exit as quickly as possible. The emergency exit's up the stairs and then out onto the street. And it's dry today, which is good news. Now a few words about that big C. I was reminded, actually, hearing people talking during the press conference of the SARS epidemic in 2003. I think it was John Leahy was telling a story about meeting some Asian CEOs in the middle of that. And he said how they talked of load factors falling to single digits. And then he pointed out that 0 was a single digit, which was quite worrying. But obviously your health and safety are of utmost importance to us, and we're following the latest recommendations of the World Health Organization and local authorities during the event. In the interests of hygiene, we advise that all attendees avoid shaking hands or faire le baiser. Hopefully I've said that right. Cheek kissing, for those that aren't familiar with my French. To greet each other in an untraditional way. I know it's a little bit formal to do that, but not very personal, but we were doing it in Singapore 3 weeks ago, and we all survived Singapore. So good ways of doing it are nodding, waving, or the old elbow knock, which is quite a good way, or maybe even tapping ankles. Just don't break one while you're doing it. And we also encourage all of you to wash your hands regularly using soap. I'd now like to welcome to the stage, without further ado, the A4E Managing Director for his welcoming notes, Thomas Reynaert.
Still need to get used to it, and but you said cheek kissing is not allowed, but then regular kissing is okay, or I'm not sure. So. Thanks very much, Max, and thanks very much first of all to FlightGlobal. I'm on now. Yes, thanks so much to FlightGlobal for their wonderful partnership. It's our fourth annual summit that we organized together with FlightGlobal. I don't want to take too much of your time, so see that as a quick intro for where we are and where we'll basically put the emphasis for today's summit. I hope you're familiar with most of it, but maybe let's start with the first one, the single aviation market. Panel 1 will really look into a study that A4E has commissioned to the University of Bergamo and looking at what the cost is of not having completed the single aviation market, all the challenges that remain. You see some numbers there. Again, panel 1 will be talking about the nitty-gritty of those numbers, why and how we've come to these numbers. It's actually about unfinished business, up to 37 billion euros of cost per year. The University of Bergamo is telling us quite impressive numbers. And as you can expect, I mean, we've limited the scope to a number of areas, the big ones, the Single European Sky, airport charges, aviation taxes, border control, and the Union Customs Code, or lack of it. Unfinished business, but again, we have a new European Commission, a new Parliament, with many representatives of you representing these institutions in the room today. So it's an opportunity for us as A4E to work with you on the challenges going forward with regards to the lack of single aviation market. And of course, all the money we can save if we get it right from a regulatory perspective, having a positive impact on the bottom line. If we do have good regulations, it's going to be good for airlines, it's going to be good for business, for passengers. And with that money, of course, we will continue to invest in green technologies. The EU Green Deal, for those here in Brussels, of course, it's been, you know, the word's been going around for the last couple of months. What does it actually mean? So panel 2 today will really look into the sustainability issues, what the Green Deal means and what this means for A4E and its members. Obviously, the challenge there, part of the discussion, the focus is very much on how can we further reduce CO2 emissions? What can we do not only as airlines, but also working with other partners in the aviation cycle, because we're not alone. We depend on suppliers, not only on customers, but also on suppliers to make it happen and to make the Green Deal together with the policymakers in Brussels a success. You will hear things coming back, a single European sky or lack of it, sustainable aviation fuels for the geeks amongst us, SAFs here in Brussels, and of course the global system, offset system, CORSIA versus EU ETS. So you will see that coming. And of course, let's not forget, probably the most important thing for airlines, we are a service to the customer, a service to the passenger. And of course, a very hot issue we have in Brussels is EU 261 revision, which is going on right now under the great proposal from the Croatian presidency. And what this means for passengers, how much better the world could be with more transparency, more certainty, and actually making sure that we can get the passenger actually at home, maybe with some delay, but at least give the passenger a better ride. So this is it very quickly in a nutshell. So you know now where the foci will be for today, the cost of non-Europe and the EU Green Deal and sustainability. I would like to leave it there, and with that, I'm calling Ben Smith, our new chairman of A4E since this morning. Congratulations, Ben, again, for your appointment. And Dan Michaels, I'm calling you to the stage for your first interview. Thanks very much, and enjoy the day.
Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be here. This is the aviation version of a fireside chat with no fire, but mood lighting. So we can feel good about that. And it's a pleasure to be here with you, Ben, in your new position. I spent many years harassing your predecessors, so it's a great opportunity to get to chat with you on stage here.
Hopefully that won't continue.
We have no fire, but we have a hand sanitizer here, which offers a segue to really the elephant in the room, the question of the day, coronavirus. How bad is it for the industry right now? We seem to have surpassed the impact of SARS. Is 9/11 the reference point? What's the feeling?
So, yeah, I would not use 9/11 as the reference point. In terms of a health crisis, SARS could be used, as somewhat of a reference point. What is definitely different with this crisis versus SARS is the type of media attention that is getting. So if you go back to the early 2000s, the type of media that was in place, the trust that was put into media at that time, social media, it just definitely had a different, an impact on the trust and the understanding of people who fly and others. So yes, it is a big event. It has a huge impact on travel right now. We're seeing that in particular to and from Asia, but to other parts of the world, across the Atlantic, South America, Africa, relatively muted. However, northern Italy, we have seen, as you know, some impacts there.
And in the time of SARS, you were at Air Canada, and Air Canada was hardest hit with the closure of Toronto. Are there lessons from that period for either the reaction or what might be expected?
Yes, so Toronto was the epicenter in North America during the SARS crisis. So the initial, the initial impact on Air Canada and the industry in and out of Toronto was quite severe, but there was a rebound relatively quickly. We did see the capacity return within 3 months. We did see demand return relatively quickly as well. It was less than 6 months before we had reached the same level of demand, and then going into increased demand the way we've seen over the last the last decades in this industry. So it was relatively quick once there was better understanding of the virus. Once the authorities have put in place measures to reduce the transmission, we did see a relatively quick rebound.
And looking forward, whatever happens, Corona is weakening airlines, and some more than others. After 9/11, after SARS, there was a wave of failures of consolidation that arguably yielded Air France-KLM as the first cross-border airline merger. Looking ahead, is it likely that what's going on now is going to trigger another wave of change in the industry?
In terms of consolidation, personally, I would say yes. There are quite a few weak carriers throughout the world, and in particular Asia. So we are seeing that. In Europe, we see the same. France, over the last few months, you've seen 2 failures. So most definitely, I believe this will accelerate consolidation.
Do you think that airlines, or will A4E be calling for any kind of relief from European or other authorities as a result of the impact of coronavirus?
Yeah, well, A4E, we've just come out this morning with a formal request to put on hold the 80-20 rule for slots. This is something that will greatly help airlines that are impacted by slots as we work through this crisis. We think this is something that is, should be, this is not a large request, so we're hoping to get that in place as quickly as possible. And then any taxes that can be lifted that are uniquely associated with our industry or temporarily lifted would also greatly be appreciated by our industry.
Okay, I think some of that probably will come back during the course of the day. I think if coronavirus hadn't hit, the main topic today, because the main topic in this town would probably have been the environment, which I know is what A4E wants to focus on. There is so much focus now on the EU Green Deal, on the environment. Airlines have been talking for a long time about efficiency and environmental issues, but no matter what happens, airline growth, at least pre-coronavirus, was outpacing efficiency gains. How concerned are you as the industry that you're going to get pulled into some kind of environmental program that you currently aren't foreseeing and isn't within your plans?
Well, look, we get new taxes all the time. I think all of you are aware. New taxes imposed on our industry for under the guise of sustainability. Many or most of these taxes do not go toward reducing our emissions or improving our efficiency. So I think it's very, very important that truths get out, and if these taxes are to remain in place, and many of you know we are lobbying hard against those taxes, that the money that is collected gets put towards actual sustainability programs. As you know, one of the fastest and most efficient ways for airlines to reduce our impact on the environment is to invest in new technology. And all of us at A4E are doing that. We put a lot of pressure on the manufacturers to come up with more efficient airplanes. The group that I represent, Air France-KLM, we have recently placed huge orders for new aircraft just this year. And we'd like to, if possible, have more money to do that more often. And the money that we are spending on taxes that are not going toward that would obviously, in our view, most definitely be more effective if they could go into helping us invest in newer technology.
We'll come back to that in a minute, but on the environment, industry's plan, Corsia, how effective can that be? There are a lot of people who are skeptical that it can actually meet the goals, and especially as social demands increase. Are you confident in it, or is there concern that it won't do enough?
I think we're, as an industry, we are committing to, being neutral by 2050, and we're working on a plan to get there as quickly as possible. We believe through all different types of processes and programs that not only ourselves, but also customers and all of our partners throughout the value chain are doing the same. So, I'm quite optimistic that we can make significant inroads into reducing our footprint.
And can passengers do anything? For example, when I buy a ticket and I have the option to sign up for an offset program or something like that, am I just assuaging my guilt, or does it actually make a difference?
Most definitely makes a difference. And we would encourage all of our customers to do as much as they can or as much as they're comfortable, not only with programs like that, but invest, support any sustainable programs that are there, maybe not directly associated with an airline.
And on the other side, there was some discussion a lot of discussion of this at the press conference this morning, but what the EU can do, the single European sky. It's been going on for forever. Is there any chance of something actually happening? Do you see any hope of progress?
Sure. I don't know if you were here during the press conference, but I think it was Carson who mentioned that with more focus on the environment, this gives us an added boost and gives us another opportunity to pressure governments to move faster on ensuring we have a single European sky. Also, we mentioned that a lot of these taxes that are in place, there is more money now that could be earmarked toward moving faster along creating the single European sky.
And do you see? Is there a feeling yet of a political will to do that? I mean, you're in Paris, and France has long been one of the worst offenders. In your conversations, do you get the sense that the environmental pressure is filtering through to discussions of air traffic management?
In particular, in France, it's a complicated country when it comes to a lot of these balances. Yes, it's definitely a topic. There are strong differences in opinion on the speed, timeline, and what part or who should go first. But there definitely is more pressure, more attention, and definitely more discussions. So we're hopeful that we can move toward single European sky as quickly as possible. We're hopeful that France is not going to be blocking it.
I'd like to come back to the issue of taxation. There are a lot of environmentalists who say that taxation, whatever impact it has on airlines, if it dampens demand, that's not a bad thing because it's growth of air traffic is a significant contributor to greenhouse emissions. Why shouldn't this be a way to control the impact of aviation?
Well, maybe I'll put it on you. Have the recent taxes or the taxes that are imposed on us, has it reduced your desire to travel? Have you canceled any trips?
I can't say. Maybe I would have taken more trips if fares were lower. So.
Well, look, we're seeing an increase in demand. Our industry has been in that way for many, many years. There's been dips here and there during certain crises, and we continue to forecast that we're going to have additional demand going forward. So there is, we talk to our customers. There is a strong benefit in many people's mind to traveling, to connect people, to ensure the world is open. We believe that airlines, we have a responsibility to ensure that wealth is there for future generations. But I do not believe that taxes damper demand for travel.
So if they don't dampen demand, I guess a counter-argument would be then airlines are actually a very efficient mechanism for collecting taxes. I mean, a lot of these taxes that passengers pay, you're not paying them, the passenger pays. You're just simply a method for collecting it. So why not load them on?
No, I firmly disagree with that. As we've said numerous times here, we would like to get as efficient as possible. Single European sky, new technology, these are just two examples. Taxes that are being directed to other programs or into general revenues, in our view, need to be invested or need to be directed into specific programs that help us become more efficient. So if we do have taxes imposed or taxes that are already in place, our push is to do just that. So it could be an efficient way to help us become more efficient, but definitely not used as a as a go-between for general revenues.
And when you go to governments and argue that taxation should actually be used rather than, you shouldn't just be a conduit for the general coffer, but the taxes should go towards boosting efficiency. Is there any receptiveness to that, or do they simply say, nice idea, thank you, we know how to run things?
No, I think, look, there's many stakeholders that would like aviation to become more environmentally friendly, more sustainable. And taxation, if it doesn't help do that, I think we all have a strong argument that it's not doing what it's supposed to do. All these taxes that are imposed in the name of sustainability, and the money is not being earmarked for that, it's not truthful. It's deceptive. It's one thing if you go out there and say, this tax is going to be used for a specific country's general revenue. Well, that's something totally different. But to have the tax being called an environmental tax, a green tax, a sustainability tax, and if that's not actually what it is, I don't think that's helpful to anyone, especially airlines.
Flip side of taxation, flight shaming. How significant a trend do you think it is for the industry? Is it just a few pockets of different countries, or is this an actual ongoing trend?
Look, I think, as I said, demand continues to grow. Customers have choices. We want to ensure that customers, maybe I'll bring it back to our employees. We get the best ideas for how to improve the footprint, sustainability of our industry from our employees. Our employees want to ensure that they are working for an airline or an airline group that is responsible. They want to feel proud of the industry they work in. They want to be able to talk about it to their friends and their family. We have an internal requirement at all of our carriers to ensure that that actually is the case. So you just extrapolate that out into the public to say, is flight shaming going to be something that affects us? I think no. I think there's a lack of education as to what our industry is doing today, what it has been doing in the past. I think we can all be very proud of the investment and the programs that the airline industry already has in place. And by collectively and individually being a little bit more articulate as to what is going on, I think that'll put a little bit more pressure, or reduce a little bit of pressure on that particular scenario or phenomenon that we're going through right now.
Okay. We just have a few minutes left. Maybe if I can ask you on one other factor affecting the industry overall. A lot of the industry is very proud of bringing in new equipment. A lot of that equipment has been delayed coming online. Do you have a sense how big a factor this year? I mean, now we have Corona dampening demand, but at the same time, a lot of the supply of new aircraft, was behind schedule. How do you see those factors playing out in the industry?
Look, it's very important for airlines that we have our deliveries and big investments delivered on time as committed. It's very important. It's not new. It's something that we count on. We design a lot of our maintenance programs. We design a lot of our schedules on the expectation that the equipment that we've ordered arrives on time. And this, there is continued pressure on that, and we're not going to relent on that. And our main manufacturers, they're here today. I'm not shy in saying that this is extremely important for us and will be. Any contract you sign, any expectation that that you have, I don't think it's so unreasonable to have that as a prime issue. Then we're perfectly in our rights to increase our demand on that. But maybe just to further your question there, coronavirus, is that changing, or does that have any impact or effect on where we stand on that? No.
And it's not if you will, a blessing in disguise if demand is dampened at a time when the supply of new aircraft is slowed?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, but we believe this is going to be a temporary impact on our industry. hopefully just a short period here, and we're going to need the airplanes that we ordered in our fleets.
And broadly, in terms of planning, I mean, this industry, is one, just almost by essence is hard to plan and faces a lot of ups and downs and upheavals. Is the current situation any different, or just yet another, going crisis to crisis? This is the latest crisis.
Well, we've had, you follow the industry. You told me earlier that you're a bit of an aviation geek. So this industry is 100 years old. It's more than 100 years old, and there have been crises, every few years. The most recent large crisis that affected the industry was the global financial crisis, and then of course we had SARS, we had 9/11, we had the tech bubble burst. Then we had all kinds of airlines that went through bankruptcy and consolidation. So yes, this is the current challenge that we're dealing through, and I'm quite confident that we'll get through this, in the relatively short period.
Seems like a good optimistic note to wind us up on.
No, I'm optimistic.
Okay, Ben Smith, thank you.
Okay,
thank you so
Dan.
much. Bye.
We have a square box in the corner, Dan, for you to go and put some euros in.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, Ben. On the point that Ben was making about educating the public and our customers, we've been launching an initiative, an I-Answer-led initiative later today, which I think will make its debut this afternoon. So stay tuned for that before the CEO discussion. I have a poll question now, actually, which we're going to put up. We're just doing a stage change because we haven't got enough chairs for the... we basically need a bigger aeroplane for the next panel. So we're going to put a poll question up, which I can't do from here, so hopefully the AV guys are going to do that. This is an interesting poll question. There is a right answer and I think 4 wrong answers. We just want to see how many people can get it right. So sorry about this. Here we go. So what is most urgently needed to complete the single European aviation market? Remove unilateral national aviation taxes, complete the single European sky, facilitate trade through the full implementation of the EU customs rules, harmonize labor rules, targeted regulation of airport charges, and other. If anyone votes for other, I'm going to find you and ask you to specify. Could I ask my panel to join me on stage, please, just while this is going on? And you'll forgive me for not shaking your hands, I'm sure. Thank you. So, no surprises. We can now reveal the correct answer is actually the one that everyone's voted for. I think, can we? Or most people have voted for. Great, so before I introduce the panel, the coronavirus has actually had a few little ripples already here, and as Thomas mentioned in his opening, and I think we talked about it in the press conference, there's been a study commissioned by the A4E for the University of Bologna, and of course they are caught up in the lockdown in northern Italy. So unfortunately, one of our guests isn't able to be here in person. But we're going to have a short video in a moment. But what they've done is they commissioned a study called The Cost of Non-Europe in Aviation, and it's based on existing literature. The goal was to develop a comprehensive evaluation of the costs resulting from an incomplete unification of EU aviation rules. So we're going to watch a video. It's about 7 or 8 minutes, which would have been presented live had he been allowed out of Italy. And then once we've seen that video, I'll introduce the panel and we'll talk about the findings and kind of dig a bit deeper into some of the issues. So, roll VT.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss with you such an important issue for airlines and for Europe. It is a pity that I'm not able to be with you also in person, but the reasons are well known. Going directly to the point, what we have done has been to summarize which are the studies made during the last 10 years and which are the results in terms of cost of non-Europe. In other words, which are the costs that affect the aviation industry, airlines above all, and which benefits are missed for passengers and for the economy as a whole due to the fact that Europe is not a completely unified continent yet in the aviation terms, despite we are asked to operate as if it were. During the last decades, the European Commission itself promoted several studies on the cost of non-Europe, but a focus on aviation is still missing. This is the most updated attempt that collects the results of these studies. We want to identify the most important issues and quantify the aviation cost of non-Europe. The areas of investigation considered are at the same time sources of inefficiencies and additional costs. We have analyzed 5 areas. The first is the single European sky and the relative air traffic management. The second is about airport charges framework. The third is dealing with the aviation taxes, and the last 2 are about Union Custom Code and border control and visa procedures. We gave a look at the impact of each area for the aviation industry, direct cost borne by airlines, loss of efficiency in asset utilization and loss of connectivity, and for passengers and the entire society. Regarding the single European sky, the starting point is that we are still living in a period of fragmented airspace within the continent, and that the modernization is going at an insufficient pace allowed by existing technologies. There are several studies, among which the ATM Master Plan 2020 is the most recent. All these analyses show, in some cases split into different components, such as capacity, environment, type of passengers, and so on, the magnitude of inefficiencies. The range of annual costs supported by the aviation industry for this fragmentation and heterogeneity range from 4.5 and 8.1 billion euro. For the society as a whole, the estimate is between 9.4 billion a year up to more than 17 billion. In general, there are both economic and environmental benefits, and they are massive. Regarding airport charges, the starting point is that there are different economic regulation regimes, and the transposition of 2009 European directive has been heterogeneous. Of course, the directive was only based on principle, cost-based, non-discrimination, transparency. First of all, in the last decade, airport charges have grown on average by more than 20%. One may say that without EU directive, this number would have been even greater. The question is to make a distinction between big airports, more than 20 million passengers a year, and medium-sized airports between 5 and 20. For the biggest, we didn't observe a particular effect of a directive. There is a need to quantify which could be the benefits of a more effective direct transposition. On the other side, for smaller airports, we have observed a relative benefit where the quality of the directive transposition was good, about 14 to 17% less than in member states with more questionable transposition. Homogeneous and good directive transposition can generate additional benefit up to 1.2 and 2 billion euro annually. After all, there is large room for improvements in this area and the need to assess the market power of biggest airports that, as you know, have a very high and stable profitability. Third aspect, the aviation taxes. Here, the starting point is that European aviation system is affected by a burdensome tax regime. It's not only a question of heterogeneity, it's also a question of level and impact. We have here 2 studies. One is by European Commission. It estimates under the hypothesis to abolish aviation taxes a positive effect for the aviation industry of 1.7 billion euro a year. The EC study also says that there is no benefit for the society because they work under the hypothesis of fiscal neutrality and imagine to transfer the abolished taxes to other stakeholders. The second study by Pricewaterhouse, at the opposite, quantifies a benefit for the aviation sector of 3.8 billion a year and for the whole economy of almost 17 billion euro. There is debate, in addition to this, on taxes for protecting the environment, as the recent trends in Germany and France testify. A last point is dealing with both Union Custom Code and border control and visa procedures. Here, for freights and passengers, we don't have large literature dealing with host topics, despite all their importance. We all know that security and control are the worst part of traveling, noisy and time-wasting. 2 points in particular deserve a more in-depth analysis: digitalization and lack of standards. If we summarize all these studies and all this area, we see that the total cost of non-Europe for the aviation industry only moved from 7.4 to 14 billion euro a year. Just to have an idea, last year, the net profit of all EU airlines were less than $7 billion. The source of inefficiency for non-Europe is really massive. The most important part is connected with improvement of a single European sky system. Our recommendation is to stress this point on the future agenda. Finally, the total impact on the economy achieves the number of 37 billion euro a year, large enough to be not disregarded by ourselves and by our interlocutors. Today, we are facing a bigger issue, but because we are all familiar with the aviation industry, we trust that it will pass, hopefully as soon as possible, and the aviation will be able to restart once again. Thank you for your attention.
That was Stefano Paleari, who's here in spirit, if not in presence. He's the professor for the Department of Management, Information and Production Engineering at the University of Bergamo. And the panel we've assembled today, which I'm about to introduce, is going to look at the cost of Europe's incomplete single aviation market. And I'm delighted to be joined by people from different parts of the industry. We have an airline, we have a politician, and we have an expert from the A4E. But I'd like to start with, we have Henrik Hololei, who I'm sure you all know. He's the Director General for Mobility and Transport for the European Commission. We have Caroline Nagtegaal, I'm getting there. Member of the European Parliament. And we have Agnes Leroux, who is A4E Policy Director. And last but not least, we have Carlos Muñoz, who is our airline representative, the CEO of Volotea. I was thinking when we were in the press conference earlier, Willie Walsh from IAG made the comment that it felt like they'd been talking about single European sky for 40 years, since he was flying 737s for Aer Lingus. In fact, perhaps before he was born. And I was wondering whether we could have a bet on whether we get a new runway at Heathrow, single European skies, or a human on Mars first. It feels that it's been talked about for so long. But just as a kickoff, perhaps we could just look at those key areas that we can make great savings for the industry and for the wider public. And my question is to each of you, starting with Henrik, what do you think we can do first? What's achievable within the next 5 years, do you think, realistically?
Well, thank you very much, and pleasure being here, and of course, good afternoon to everyone in the hall. Interesting study, of course. We have also done similar studies in the Commission, and it was also referred to when we talk about the taxes, for example, and some others. I mean, the numbers. Well, I think they are pretty much in the same magnitude. So it's clear that the cost of non-Europe is very high, but it's not only about aviation, it's about everywhere. And that also is something which makes me a little bit sad. What makes me sad is that, you know, Europe is at its best always when it tears down borders, when it creates united procedures and opens up the possibilities of the market. But when you go around and ask and hear what has been said, then we don't talk about the need for continuous work on the single market anymore that much as we used to do in the past. And I think this is not right. I think this is the hard core of Europe. Europe is about single market. And aviation would have never got where it is today if we wouldn't have started 28 years ago the single European aviation market. I mean, this is one of the great achievements also. It has totally changed the nature of flying. It has made it affordable to any income group. And we are all benefiting from this single European aviation area, where we have torn down the borders for ownership and control. We have torn down the sort of national regulation. And that is a perfect example of what can be achieved if you do that. So for me, talking about the need to constantly develop our single market, which is far from complete, and also the single aviation market, is an absolute must. Now, having said that, of course, single European sky is something which comes out as the key deliverable. And yes, if I look at these different components, then taxes, I mean, you can always do the studies, you can always calculate, it's not going to change. This industry is going to have more taxes, not less taxes. And I think you all know it. So you can indulge yourself with a study what it would be if there are no taxes, but the reality is unfortunately much harsher. So what we can deliver, single European sky or human on the Mars? Well, the latter might also be a possibility, comes first. We have been talking a lot about the single European sky indeed. And at the same time, I would say that we haven't moved that much towards the understanding that one needs to tear down the borders in the sky. To me, it is absolutely inconceivable to think that we have free movement of goods, not even talking about people or capital, you know, and on the terrain, it's no problem to cross the borders. But suddenly the borders, which are invisible in the sky, start to appear. And of course, it has been the member states who simply don't want to give up the borders in the sky. And I think this is absolutely disgraceful. And now, the question is now or never. I don't think we are ever being closer in delivering on that than we are today. Why also? Last year was, in that sense, a good year. We had two extremely important documents prepared. First was the airspace architecture study, which I think is also a precondition for pushing forward with the single European sky, but even more important, the Vice Persons Group report, what needs to be done in order to deliver, which really included the wise people, and many of them today also in this hall. So this is now something which is a united front which has been created, and this was also endorsed in September by all stakeholders, as I tend to say, from the unions to the airspace users and even to the helicopters. So all stakeholder organizations have also given their go. And now we are also working in DG Move to table this updated proposal, because let's not forget that the single European sky proposal was 7 years in the council, not moving on because of Gibraltar. And I'm not going to go down that road because you don't want to hear what I think about it. But the point is that 7 years, nothing happened. And that was also not because the Commission didn't want, the airspace users didn't want, or anyone. No, because we just were not able to move ahead. Okay, now we can move ahead, finally. At least one positive thing about the Brexit. And then that means that we will be finalizing the updated proposal in these weeks. Actually, I have even hold in my hand the draft, and Philippe has even, who is here, has been very actively involved in putting it together. So I think we will put that on the table. We have this presidency, and we have also the next presidency who are keen to take it forward. And if we fail now, then I would say that there will be human on Mars before we can have single European sky.
Thank you, Henrik. I think we're 2 hours in, actually, if you include the press conference, and that's the first time I've heard the word Brexit, but who knew that would happen this year? Caroline, I mean, there's no surprises in the report, but you're involved in the European Parliament Committee on Transport and Tourism, so obviously it's something that's close to your heart. With that perspective, you presumably find these findings frustrating to see the problem.
Yeah, well, first of all, is it working? Not really.
Are we?
No, I don't think.
Yep,
oh, yeah,
it's
no,
good.
it's
Yep.
Well, first of all, I would like to give a big thanks also to the researchers from the University of Bergamo, because I think that this will give very relevant information also for politicians, and it makes my life maybe a little bit easier to use also these arguments. But looking at the report and the essential recommendations, and Henrik has also mentioned it, the single European sky is, in my opinion, one of the, well, let's say, low-hanging fruit we could and we should take. But the point is, and that's also what you can ask me, well, what's your role now? Because what you see in the parliament, it's years ago that we said we finalized the procedure. But Henrik mentioned it as well, the issue is in the council at this moment. But I think it's fair also from your side to ask the parliament, what are you going to do in the upcoming period to put pressure to finalize this, I think, most relevant file we have in the European Union. And I think what you see in the parliament, and that's quite unique, that from the left to the right side, there is a majority of people who would like to complete the single European sky. And so you could say that that's quite unique. My friends from the Greens or my friends from the Social Democrats, a lot of MEPs are also in favor to realize that. So what I hope that my colleagues will do as well, not only in the Transport Committee, but broader, because single European sky is not only a transport issue. It's about trade, it's about broader mobility, it's, well, let's say it's sort of our fundamental right. So what I hope that all of my colleagues try to put pressure on their own ministries of transport in their own countries to finalize this issue. And then I would like to make a short link with tax. Because in my opinion, there is a link with single European sky and aviation taxes. And I'm a liberal, so taxes and liberals are not big friends most of the time. But I think that taxes could be useful. And when you look in a specific way to the aviation sector, tax can help to make it more innovative, but only if you put the revenues into the sector. And I think also that's what Ben Smith already mentioned. If there are taxes, please give the sector the opportunity to invest in the new type of fuels. Look at the synthetic gas plant they built in the Netherlands. Look at all the ideas about the breakthroughs of the sector, and some of you are very much involved in that, what they can do. So there is a link, in my opinion, we could make. So when you talk about the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, CES is one. And when we talk about taxes, and that's the link I would like to make, to be honest, and maybe it's a hard statement and the Commission will not in favor and will not happy if I'm saying this, but slapping the industry with taxes, if we talk about ticket tax or kerosene tax, in my opinion, it should be off the table until we have completed CES. And I think that's one of the most important things we have to do right now.
Okay, so you're saying basically that they need to get the house in order before they start penalising the airlines for their...
Yeah, in my opinion, taxes is in that case a real penalty, and it can help, really it can help to make... Tax is not a negative word, but we have to look like how can you make a positive effect on taxes, and you can only do that if the revenues go directly to the sector.
Right. Okay. What's been the reaction to that view amongst your colleagues in at the Parliament? Did they feel that's?
Well, to be honest, the discussion about ticket tax and also about kerosene tax, we have to be honest. There is of course a majority in the Parliament or really looking into taxes. And that was what Henrik also said. This is the discussion nowadays. But to be honest, I'm a member of the European Parliament, so I have also the task to express my opinion and my ideas and to have the arguments. And that's why it's so useful to have research like this, to use the arguments and try to convince my colleagues how we should work in the Parliament and what we should do. And that's the way I would like to help the sector, and in that case also to help, in that case, the world and the people, because the aviation sector, and you talk about with Ben Smith about fly shaming. Well, I really hate that word. In Dutch we call it vliegschaamte. Well, that sounds even worse. But I found it really stupid, because why should we be ashamed of flying? Because should we be ashamed of connecting people? Should we be ashamed of doing trade? Should we be ashamed of exploring the world? No, not at all.
Thank you, Caroline. By the way, everybody, remember you've got your Slido interaction tool to ask. Oh, we've been using it, great. And also, we will take questions from the floor in a few moments if people have anything they want to use an old-fashioned microphone for. But before we go to the questions, I just want to speak to Carlos, who obviously brings a great airline perspective to this. I guess, that, again, as I said to Caroline, no surprises that Single European Sky is such a penalizing system for operations, but you obviously feel the brunt of the inefficiency of ATM on a daily basis. So, can you put into perspective how the lack of progress affects your operations and how you feel it could deliver the big benefits?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Max. Yeah, we do suffer it a lot. I'll go into that in a minute. But first, I have to thank you actually personally, because we're going to have Martin Gauss in this panel, and we both had committed to keep a low profile. And I see that he's on the cover page of your magazine. So, no, jokes aside, I'll just say one word about Volotea, because I'm sure as one of the younger members of the association, you do not. Henrik knows us, I realize Caroline doesn't. But
that's
just,
what you're talking about, right?
That's what I'm talking about, nicely done. And we agreed, he did a little marketing stint for the magazine too, okay? So,
Thank you.
But jokes aside, just in a word, Volotea, I know Henrik, you know, so, and a few other people, but it's the youngest airline. We started in 12, so, and I think we're actually the only airline this decade that has grown strongly. In Europe, we have now 360 routes. We have 16 bases across 5 different European countries. And more interestingly, I think to your point, Caroline, on connectivity, of the 360, 220 more or less of the routes did not exist before. So we're putting together EU territories and regions that were, frankly, overlooked by our industry. Close that intro briefly. We do suffer a lot, and again, the industry and Airlines for Europe in particular has done a terrific job, I think, putting the message out there. I think this study is mind-blowing. I mean, I don't know, 17 billion obviously sounds like a big number to everybody, purely from the Single European Sky. But if I would just ask you 1 second to put it in perspective, again, we're looking at a market that has got, call it 800 million passengers intra-European. Just divide the two, or look at the 34 billion wasted on the delayed implementation of the single aviation market. You're talking about 30, 40 euros per passenger. This is humongous. This is phenomenal. And I do think, briefly to not extend my we suffer from it. It's already a competitive enough industry. Now we have Corona, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as Henrik and the Commission knows pretty well, the technology is there. We all in the industry want to do it. There is only the will lacking. So I was extremely happy. I was less happy to hear him on taxes. I'm much more aligned with your comments. But jokes aside, I'm so happy to hear that you think the momentum might have finally come on the Single European Sky, because again, it's such low-hanging fruit, such opportunity. The joke that I think I actually heard Willy made some time is, when he was flying, he would notice a bump as he was passing from France to Italy, or, France, because you feel that in the air, right? That's the frontier. It's really silly. It's really anachronistic by now. We think it would make a huge difference. Last but not least, environmentally is also of huge impact. We think it could decrease the CO2 emissions by approximately 10%. So if you add all of that in, if I have to put one big wish that, when we're together here next year, we've accomplished something all as an industry and Airlines for Europe, and Volotea as part of it, doing it is to have moved aggressively on the Single European Sky, indeed.
Thank you. So Agnes, who's here from A4E, and she's been very helpful putting this panel together and been involved in the study. So we have a poll question, actually, don't we, which we can call up. But we'll go back to the Slido, but could I get the AV guys to put the poll up? This one, there isn't a right answer. We just want to see what your thoughts are. And then I'll ask Agnes to talk a little bit more about the study. So what is supporting the further integration of the aviation single market? Now that's...
From the first poll.
You want the...
Maybe the results from the first poll, the one we did before, yeah. Before the start of our panel.
This was the poll question, isn't it, that we wanted to do?
Yeah.
And you'd like the results of the first poll in a moment, would you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the question here is for the audience, just to continue the discussion. In your opinion, what is supporting the further integration of the aviation single market? I think Henrik Hololei has underlined quite strongly how important the aviation single market is and how the single market is really underpinning the whole development of the EU economy over the last decades. But what, in your opinion, would continue to support this development? Should we need to make this narrative stronger? As we've seen, it has a bit off the agenda. Obviously, very important topics that the industry has to face currently, but nonetheless, as A4E and with our member airlines, we believe this should remain a core element of our engagement with the EU institutions moving forward. So yeah, we'll give you maybe a few minutes to the audience to answer the poll. And
should we leave that up for people to vote?
Yeah.
And you can tell us a little bit more about the study that Stefano and his team undertook.
Exactly. So you heard Professor Stefano Paleari from the Bergamo University. They've done a really good job. So what they've done is really looking at existing literature, studies from the European Commission, studies from consultancies, from Eurocontrol, etc. So studies and reports that are publicly available that you can have a look at. So the methodology was really to look at what is already out there, what can all this collection of reports and studies can tell us about the aviation market in Europe today. And we wanted to focus on a series of topics, obviously single European sky, but also airport charges, aviation taxes, as well as Union Customs Code and border control. So those two elements have not been studied extensively yet, and actually we would be calling for the European Commission and the institutions to look at those aspects as well, because we believe this might be elements of the European aviation single market that we don't talk about very often, but that would require further study and would demonstrate where we would have further gains to be obtained. So that's quite interesting. And in terms of what was really surprising for us in the findings was really the scope and the magnitude of the costs that the professors have highlighted. So our starting point was a study from the European Parliament Research Group, that was looking at the cost of non-Europe throughout the whole European economy, and specifically looking at transport. They looked at, or they analyzed the flux of passengers between different European airports, and they assumed that the cost would be 1 to 2 billion euros per year. However, when you look at the breadth of literature and the different elements that I've just mentioned earlier, we reach up to 37 billion euros per year for the industry and the economy. So again, we're not just looking about the cost on airlines, but the broader cost on passengers and the economy as such, which I think also brings an interesting element to the discussion, that when when A4E and our airlines are complaining about taxes or are pointing out inefficiencies in the single European sky, we're actually not just putting this out there for ourselves, but also a better functioning single aviation market in Europe would benefit everyone.
Okay. So does the ranking of the audience there surprise you, or would you agree with the way that that's come out, the results?
No, it's quite strong. Obviously, aviation is a main element to connect people, and I would say that the liberalization of the aviation market has certainly helped as well the tourism industry. But we have, I think, the second answer from the audience today is quite strong. Well, I would assume the audience is very pro-European, but that's definitely one element that we can use in supporting further integration of the aviation single market, is to try to support the European identity, allowing passengers to go from Croatia to Germany. It definitely helps create this sense of belonging.
Okay. Did you say you wanted to see the first question results?
Could be, yeah,
Are we able to do that, AV? Just going to check whether we can do that. Whilst they are doing that, I was going to pick up on airport charges. Carlos, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that as well. How does that impact your business, and how do you see that improving in the near to medium term? Or not?
Yes, it impacts us very, very heavily. I think most people in the audience, if not all, know that airport charges can represent 10 to 20% of the cost of any airline. We've seen them gone up significantly, in some cases 100% over the last decade. And obviously, you all know, thanks to low-cost airlines and to increased competition, no disrespect to the legacy partners, have also become much more competitive, but the prices have obviously dropped significantly. So that, in the context of the airport charges, I think, as Airlines for Europe, I think Thomas touched on that, we're quite happy that I think that you will revise the directive in 20, if I don't have that wrong. And essentially, it feels like the implementation of the directive hasn't been that good, that consistent, as Agnes also and Professor Paleari were saying. And probably not tackling. This might be unpopular. I'm seeing some airport friends here, and we had the head of ACI before. But the market power of some airports in particular. So, as an airline group, we obviously favor that. And to your question, Max, we definitely think it's pretty critical. And we like the direction that, again, the Commission is pointing to there.
Okay, so Henrik, how is the Commission going to be more effective at regulating and enforcing the airport charge directive?
Well, it will be, of course, very popular in this audience to say that it has to have a significant overhaul. But as you well know, we have taken the view in the Commission to find the best possible balance, and of course have been very intensively talking to both parties, airports and airlines, and both have very strong arguments. But our role is to be there to facilitate an outcome which is also the most optimal one. So we have also published some of our findings. This work is ongoing. I didn't see a major enthusiasm on either side, so that's, or at least for me, is an indicator that we are on the right track. And then both sides are somewhat equally unhappy. But the reality is, and I've always been in that opinion, that all the legislation that we have needs to be modernized after a while. It's also very clear that with the Airport Charges Directive, it has worked, I think, in general, fine. It has also increased competition between the airports. I think there is a competition between the airports. Now, does it work ideally? No. Does it need to be modernized? I would say yes. And also to see which are those airports which have the effective market power. And we need to identify that. We need to have a procedure which also is transparent and which allows to make that assessment based on facts, and not only based on, let's say, the feelings. And I think that is exactly what we are currently doing. So this process is ongoing, and we will see where we will be landing in the end. But my ideal solution is that nobody will be happy, because then it's fine. And to have an outcome which also is a modernized legislation which is able to pass the test for the next decades to come. I mean, obviously this has been a big issue. A4E has been very actively pursuing this, but equally ACI has also brought its voice always to the audience, and then I think that it's good that this discussion is ongoing. But if you allow me, Ben, I just want to say one thing I forgot also earlier, and that's related a bit, to the taxes. That's also related to the single European sky. And of course, today, when we are within the narrative of the European Green Deal, obviously the sustainability is a key topic. And it was also mentioned, single European sky can reduce the carbon emissions about 10%. So I think that's a very powerful argument today, and we continue to use that argument. And at the same time, when we use that argument, I think it is also very important that the airspace users, and here today also the major airlines in Europe, A4E, will be very outspoken about what and how they are going to do and how they are going to make the steps in order to increase the sustainability of air travel. This is the license to grow. This is also the license to talk about, let's say, sustainability when we talk about the single European sky or when we talk about the taxis. And really, I'm very hopeful that the airlines come together and come up with very clear targets, because I think otherwise it is very difficult to in today's world also to have the legitimacy to speak if you don't do enough in order to become sustainable. And yes, obviously, we all know better engines, better airplanes, and so on. Sustainable aviation fuels, these are all very important elements, but I think that also the targets are needed with the European aviation should put on the table, and I think this gives also more legitimacy to use the sustainability argument, be it on the single European sky, be it on taxis or anything else.
Thank you. Is there a risk, Caroline, that if the European airlines are enforced, have legislation enforced upon them to be more environmentally friendly, improve their credentials, it could put them in an anti-competitive situation with third-party operators? Is there something along that area that could be a concern for European operators?
Well, maybe also to combine it a little bit with the note of Mr. Hololei about the Green Deal. What I really do think that the Green Deal is a fantastic initiative, and we should embrace the idea of making Europe cleaner. And yes, a lot of sectors have an enormous. Well, I think they should invest in it in a fantastic way, and they could do it in that way. But what I see is that the sector, and especially the aviation sector, has also the task to explain and to show and tell a bit more the way they are doing it right now. And for example, I found it really strange that I have to convince my colleagues that put a 737 full of batteries, that's not a really good idea, that will not fly. But is it my task to do this, or is it your task to do that? And to give a realistic approach what the sector can do, and on the other hand, what the Commission can do, what the Parliament could do. When you look for the initiative from the Commission regarding the directive of the AFID, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, these are really great initiatives to help the sector to make it greener. So if you could give the Commission, but also the MEPs, the great input and great statistics, that could help. I want to make, last but not least, the link, and that's also related to your question about taxes. Again, to say it again, I'm not against taxes, but taxes should help, and research shows that the kerosene tax or the ticket tax will not make the environment much better. That's why I'm so convinced about the fact to put the revenue back to the sector. But for the other hand, when we look at taxes, we're talking not about, aviation is not working in a local sector or in a national sector or not even in a European sector. We're talking about a global sector. So when you talk about measures, and not only regarding taxes, but please look at the global level you are working in. That's the way how you compete. And I hope that the Parliament, the Commission, the Council will look more to these topics in the way we compete in a global level.
Okay, thank you. We'll save your standing ovation till the end, Caroline, which someone's asked for after your earlier comment.
Okay.
There's a question from the floor. Ian Taylor, sorry.
Hi, Max. Yeah, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly in London. Look, the frustration on a single European sky is justified and obvious and all the rest of it. But with respect, endlessly talking about the argument for it doesn't necessarily move things on, does it? I'd be interested to hear if the panel could shed some light on what the blocks are. What is it that's making member states resistant to a single European sky? If you want to unblock anything in life, you need to understand what's causing the blockage, don't you? And address that. So could you tell us what is causing the block to a European single sky?
We could have a whole day on that one, I think. But Henrik, would you like to address that?
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, it's about the I would say, false pretension of sovereignty in the air. That's the first and foremost. And secondly, the resistance to change. And then, of course, you can come with a lot of other elements which are all in relation to that. But I think these are the two main things. And it's been everybody's very comfortable with the current situation. You know, we are just here talking, you know, and barking. Dogs are barking, but the caravan keeps on moving. So. You know, you get your revenues. Everything has been done the way it's been done for the last decades. So now you want to change that, then of course very strong resistance to change comes, and also ANSPs sometimes don't want to do things in the new way and also cooperate with each other. Look what happened when we tried to do with the FABs. The functional airspace blocks. I mean, today you can say that basically that the FABs are dead because making countries, even in the regional level, to work together was simply unsurmountable obstacles came and didn't allow us to move ahead. So I mean, these are the elements. But I think I would suggest also to read the Vice Persons Group report, which actually very nicely put all the necessary steps that need to be done. And if you take these steps, you can actually see where the blockages lie. And if we will be able to address even 60% of the recommendations, we have already made a significant improvement. And yes, I would say now it's the last chance. If we fail this time, it is not going to be possible to move ahead with the single European sky, because the stars have never been so much aligned as they are today, and failure is simply not an option. And wait a couple of more weeks when we also put a new proposal on the table, so there will be another interesting reading.
Thank you, Henrik. So, Carlos, do you share that optimism? Are the stars most aligned they've ever been for this to be a success at last?
Obviously, hearing Henrik makes the heart of everybody in aviation rejoice, and we'd like to take that momentum. I just make mention to Carsten Spohr, I think, said earlier that, they're also pushing at the national level. I understand, without wanting to get into speculation, Max, that there is a part of member state willingness, right? So, and, it's always at the core of it, France and Germany, I believe. So, hearing all those things and this realization that, everything around it, I think Willie put it very, very nicely before, 40 years, the same way. Everything around has changed. The way we run airlines, the way our planes are, the massive use of technology, the way they consume, this is, overdue. And then hearing Henrik say it's now or never, well, I hope it's now. That's I don't have any more information other than we all try to push how we can.
Yeah, and hopefully this study will bring it to the front of the agenda again and emphasize the need for reform.
Just allow me, I'll just, I also found one study which was made also some time ago, which basically said that if we have the single European sky, it could contribute up to 720 million euro per year to the EU economy and deliver up to 11,000 jobs. So, I mean, we have had a lot of arguments also in the past, and it's always good to have more arguments on the table, but I'm afraid that the arguments are not enough. I mean, now it's time for the action, because nobody is questioning the arguments. Financial as well.
A little less conversation and a little more action. Right. On that note, I'd like to thank my panel, and maybe a standing ovation for Caroline. Thank you very much.